All right, well, good morning to everybody who's joined us. Senator Shirkey will be with us in about 10 minutes. He's wrapping up another meeting. But I just wanted to welcome you all. I'm Jennifer Smith, Director of Government Relations for the Michigan Association of School Boards. A long time. So I want to welcome you all joining us today. We are going to be joined by Senator Shirkey, who will speak to us for a few minutes and then be able to take your questions. I appreciate those of you that have sent questions in advance. I have forwarded them to him as well so that he could take a look at those before he joined us. But first, I want to turn it over to our Executive Director, Don Wetruba, for a hello and a statement from him.
Morning to everybody, and I just want to say first thanks to everybody that is on the video today. I know this is trying to set up calls to be able to listen to our state leaders is important to get you the information to do your work, so thank you for participating. Also to all of you, superintendents and board members, thank you for everything that you're doing in your districts. I mean, I think that at this point, as much as this has been a difficult time for all of you, I think public education is coming out of this looking really good, in that you have done well in providing for your communities, for your families, for the kids in your districts. I think the food service aspect has really shown a responsiveness that maybe those that didn't have kids in the schools anymore are still hearing about. So I really do think this has been from a public school perspective and the public perception side of things, I think this has been something that has served us all well. And as you all move into your distance learning, I would encourage you to really kind of think about the staff and the work that you're doing in your districts. You know, we've been shut down at MASB now for about a month, and how you engage your staff from a leadership perspective, how you try to keep things light at some points during the week is going to be important, as they have a really difficult task ahead of them. And I think as superintendents and building principals and board members, brainstorming about, you know, what kind of calls are you going to do during the week with your teachers to bring them up to speed, not even to bring them up to speed, to engage them and talk about what's going on and hear from them what struggles they have. I know for my staff and talking to them, it is something that has worked well with us, and I would encourage you just to be thinking about that. We get caught up in our day-to-day work and sometimes forget that this is a new environment for everybody, and letting your teachers know that they're doing okay and it's okay to be frustrated is something I think that you'll find is important. I will also say this whole process has been frustrating and hard for everyone. I don't think anybody on this call would disagree with that. For those members that are small business owners, for those members that have been laid off during this process, and maybe most particularly for those members that have lost loved ones during this crisis, my heart goes out to each of you. I think that this struggle is real for everybody, and I think we have to be able to have as much grace for each other as we can. I do want to share next week on Tuesday at noon, we're going to do another webinar. We're billing it as the State of the Association. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about how MASB is doing. We're doing just fine. I will kind of brief people on that. What I would like to share is, or have you share if you join us, is the State of the Association from a membership and school perspective. Share the things that are going well for you in your districts. Share the things that maybe are challenges. Share things that you have planned, because I think we need to create a community and a learning opportunity. So with what's something a district is doing well, they can share it. For something that a district tried that didn't work so well, other districts can learn from that, whether that be school board members or superintendents. I'm going to encourage as many people as possible to get on that call next week and share some stories with each other about what's going on. We'll talk about virtual board meetings if you want to. We'll talk about what are people thinking about graduation later this year. I think it will be a real opportunity to kind of have a shared feeling of community amongst everybody. So I encourage you to join with that. The last thing I will just say, we have Senator Shirkey coming on shortly. Jen and her team have worked hard with MASA and others in this crisis with the legislature, with the governor's office. They're busier probably now than they have ever been in the space just because of the nature of what's going on. But I will say, and I said it earlier about each other, about having grace as we have communications today with Senator Shirkey, as we are all leaders within our communities and have, for us that are older, have Facebook accounts and other social media. I would encourage you to be leaders in your communities so that as your kids and your families are watching you, I don't care if you have disagreements. I have disagreements with a lot of our elected officials, but whether it be President Trump or Governor Whitmer or Senator Shirkey today, Speaker Chatfield, whoever it might be, I do think there's an opportunity here for superintendents and board members to, as much as possible, take the high road and understand that probably none of us would like to be in their jobs right now making the decisions that they have to make. So I would just encourage you all to take that, or at least have that thought in your head as you're tweeting the next tweet or posting the next thing on Facebook or posing the next question to Senator Shirkey today. This is tough times. It's tough for you as leaders in your districts, and it's tough for them as leaders in our state. So I will wrap it up with that and think that Senator Shirkey should be on shortly, and I will turn it back over to Jen to fill some space if he's not on quite yet.
All right, there is the chat function at the bottom to submit questions. I appreciate those that have sent them in advance. As I mentioned, I have sent some of those straight to Senator Shirkey and his staff so that he knew what was coming before he joined us. If you are on the phone, if you push *9, it will raise your hand and we can call on you. As I mentioned, we are keeping everyone muted just to cut down on background noise. But if you have a question that you need to speak, we will unmute you for that, obviously. With that, are there questions that people want to add for our list now or while we're waiting for Senator Shirkey? Are there any questions for MASB? So there is a question in the chat that maybe is for everybody out there. If you have ideas, you could respond. But that the board would like to do something different for Teacher Appreciation Week this year. Are there any ideas out there? And this is from Sarah Dahl. Sarah, what district are you with? If you could add that people could get in touch with you. And you can share your ideas with them. And she's with Saranac Community Schools. And we are joined now by Senator Shirkey. Thank you so much for doing this on such short notice. We really do appreciate it. I had forwarded a few questions to your staff, but we've got a couple others that have come in, but I am just going to turn it over to you, Senator, and let you address the group.
Thank you, Jennifer. What I'm going to do is make a couple of opening remarks and then allow you to facilitate asking of the questions, and we'll just work through it. That makes these Zoom meetings the richest, is when we're interacting. So appreciate the opportunity to speak to this august group. I'm a fellow school board member, and that's a fond memory of mine, not without some still healing wounds, but nonetheless, it was a great experience for me, and I'm hoping that you enjoy the same. It's very important work, especially in days like today. As you all know, we've been struggling with a little bit of a crisis, a little bit of a challenge across the board. Started out 4 or 5 weeks ago, and I believe our governor made the right decision to dramatically and quickly act in a rather blunt force way. Though I would have done it slightly different, the reality is we didn't have enough time to talk about it. We didn't have time to study data. We actually had to take action, and that's what she did. And so for a few weeks, we were very supportive of that as people started to adjust to the new style of life and protecting, following what I call the new big three. That's hygiene, distancing, and now wearing masks whenever we're out in public, especially right now. We've now transitioned to a different time where we actually have some experience behind us. We also have the ability to observe other states, other countries around the world and what they've experienced. And I believe it's time for us to start thinking about transitioning from an essential definition to a safe definition, doing that in phases. The fact of the matter is, later today, you'll see an announcement come out of the Senate Republicans caucus specific to that, laying out a recommended plan that the governor will be sending to the governor and asking her to assign her teams, hopefully engage with us and refine it, make it better. And so we can send some hope and some inspiration to the people of Michigan who sorely need it right now, being confined to our homes for the better part of 3 weeks. It would be remiss if I didn't also speak quickly about budget implications. I know that's of concern to all of us, but in particular, those that are closely associated with schools. And the fact of the matter is, I'm not going to pull any punches here. The current estimates for the current budget year, we only have 5.5 months left for this current budget year, ending end of September, is that it'll have between a $1 and a $3 billion negative effect. I think that's a pretty wide range. I'm hoping it's closer toward the lower end than the higher end, but nonetheless, we have very little time to be able to affect that kind of change. We can't print money like the federal government can, so we have to complete a balanced budget. And so that'll be the urgent matter by the appropriations teams actually started 2 weeks ago. The appropriations subcommittee chairs have already been working on 15, 20, 25, and 30% plans of reductions within their own departments, within their own budgets. And then when we finally get the go-ahead from Senate Fiscal and the State Budget Office on what the true financial effect is going to be on revenue, then we will reach into those plans and start sharing the prioritization, getting input, and then putting them into action. And we'll have to do a negative supplemental sometime between now and, probably early July. Every day we wait makes it harder to make the adjustments. And so there's no line item and no person and no project that's immune from review on this. I'm just being as honest with you as I possibly can be. The projections for the effect on next year's budget, which starts October 1st, are in the same ballpark, but it's a little too far out, and I have a little more confidence in the speed of our recovery. So I think that it ranges between $1 and $4 billion. I am hoping against hope that is toward the lower end as well. But nonetheless, there's still a dramatic change in our ability to put the budget together. We are still targeting getting that budget for next year done. I'm not sure we'll make July 1st. That could be a little aggressive, but it will be early July. And the reason for that is because everybody's still been working even through this shutdown. So that's kind of the overview of how I see the lay of the land. And I'd like to just, Jennifer, turn it over to questions. I think that's the best part of these Zoom meetings.
Okay, I think the first question is just to clarify on the $1 to $3 billion revenue reduction that you're talking about. Are you seeing that as statewide, the general fund plus school aid fund, or just one of the funds?
It'll affect both, for sure. We're hoping that it affects the school aid fund the least amount, but these reductions will affect the entirety of our budgeting.
Okay. So I'm just going to go through the questions sort of as I've received them.
Okay.
Are there any thoughts on the timeline or any knowledge about the status of the Michigan Reconnect program?
We had to make a very tough decision in this most recent negative supplemental, both on Reconnect and on Going Pro. Both are, I think, very important programs. They've both proven their value, but we got presented with an emergency that we didn't anticipate. So this budget year, there will be no continuation of those two. But I'm hoping, sincerely hoping that we can reintroduce those in the next budget year.
And then this is a question that has come up repeatedly in different ways, but it deals with broadband access, especially in our rural areas. And one of the questions was, is there some sort of initiative similar to what they did for electricity back 90 years ago for rural, but something to get broadband into those rural areas and the low income areas, because without it, we're really hampering those students and staff that don't have access as well.
So we've been playing patty cake with this topic for for 20 years and allowing the natural progression of capitalism to kind of take its foot and relied heavily upon that. But I think this experience we're having now demonstrates the vulnerability of not having that in place. I do not think we're going to be having a specific program on that in the very short term. In other words, this budget year. But I think it's going to be a very high profile and high priority starting when we start working on the next budget year and implementing it in the fall. I want to emphasize something. Here. The recommendations that came out of the work groups on so what to do now that the schools are closed down through the rest of the school, the buildings are closed down through the rest of the school year. The recommendations that came out, I think were, I hope you saw evidence of your fingerprints on some of those plans. We worked very hard to make sure that every school district had the maximum amount of latitude and flexibility to take advantage of their unique circumstances, their unique challenges, and their unique assets. And we didn't expect and don't expect it all to be the same because every district is a little bit different. More importantly, the way it's characterized is just as critical. It's not virtual learning, it's not online learning, it's distance learning. And in this case, words matter because we recognize that there's a disparity amongst school districts as to who has better access to broadband and more bandwidth and so forth. But you know what? There are differences amongst the school districts even before this happened. And so we can't strive this in the short term in particular to try to remove those differences. We just have to acknowledge them. We now know with perfect clarity how vulnerable we are to be able to execute technology and to, frankly, use more creative opportunities to enhance the education experience and product for students. But I'm very anxious to watch how different school districts apply their innovation and creativity and answer this call. Some districts have been blowing me away with the kind of products they're putting out there with their students, and in some areas that don't have broadband, widespread down to the granular level broadband support. So distance learning is the word, the phrase. It includes virtual learning, includes online learning, but it's not limited to either one of those. And I think we'll find some fantastic examples of how well this works, and it might even help improve some outcomes. But there is one constraint that I got to point out that you can have a big part in. So over the last few decades, schools have continued, and I know you'll agree with this, schools have continued to become more surrogate parents, I'll call it. I'm just going to call it like I see it. Schools required to provide more meals. Schools required to provide more daycare. Schools required to do a lot of things that typically in the past families were fully responsible for. And that reliance, frankly, those voids and those services have been well done by schools. But now we're going to have to reverse it, at least for the short term. And that constraint that I'm talking about is parents, because now school boards and teachers and administrators to execute this distance learning effectively have to rely on parents now to become, to a certain extent, the surrogate teachers and make sure that the kids are getting their information and they're actually trying to do it. Parents aren't trained to be teachers, but they absolutely can be trained and expected to encourage and ensure that a time and attention is being put to these assignments and these exercises that are being sent out by teachers. So it's an interesting change in roles for the short term, and it'll even get a little bit more exacerbated when we start opening up the economy and some of those parents are allowed to go back to work. That even creates a different challenge. And I'm only identifying it because there's no reason why we should run from it. We should acknowledge it now and do our best to mitigate it. And I think it's a real important point for us to keep in mind as we're rolling out and testing this notion of distance learning. Thank you, Jennifer.
I think that goes directly into one of the questions we had. So if the stay-at-home order is lifted, but we're still doing distance learning, is there a plan for those parents that will have to go back to work, but their children are still at home with the distance learning?
There is no statewide plan, and there will be no statewide plan. This has got to be something that parents have to embrace right now and start planning for. We know it's going to be a big challenge, but I also know this: if we attempted to do a statewide plan, we'd screw it up. And so all I can do is be encouraging to say, people, listen, you're going to have to help us get through this for the next couple months. Actually, I believe it's probably through the summer. But I'm not going to pussyfoot around on this one. There's not going to be a statewide plan on this. And there may be local plans, which are great, and we may be able to find some grants and other things that can help supplement them if they require resources. But it's really important to get the message out here that there should be nobody sitting around waiting for big government to come down and put the heavy hand in here and try to solve that. That's got to be done at the most granular level.
Matthew Wilk, you have your hand raised. I will unmute you for your question.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Shirkey, for joining us. My name is Matt Wilk. I'm the president of Northville Board of Education. I submitted a question that you touched on briefly, but I want to make it more direct because that's how it came to me from my constituent. She asked, this is a stay-at-home mom. She said, what is the plan for kids whose parents currently go to work or who end up having to go back to work when the stay-at-home order is lifted? I am a single mom, and when I am allowed to go back to work in my office, then how am I supposed to homeschool my kids when I'm at work? And I think what I'd like to hear is when we are talking about having an economic game plan to reopen the economy, to understand that the schools, if you push on a string and open the economy, but tell all single parents like my constituent that they have to stay at home, that's not going to open the economy the way we would like. Do you or the state have a plan for that?
Well, I think I just addressed that, Matt, and I'm open to any ideas and suggestions. Nobody's telling any parent that they got to stay at home. In fact, just the opposite. But what I am saying is that they better start planning right now for whatever options might be available to them, and start counting on neighbors and friends and grandparents and you name it. But this is a time where people have to get very innovative and very creative. It's a short period of time, and it's not going to be easy. I'm not underestimating it at all. But Matt, I think that there's not enough time, and B, I think it'd be a mistake for us to have some kind of statewide proposal here. I know that's not a satisfactory answer, but it's an honest answer.
Do you have any thoughts at this point about starting the next school year earlier if things are safe at that time? And then sort of a follow-up with it with some of the things that schools will need. Like we're hearing from a lot of districts, they're going to want more mental health supports when students come back, that they think that there will be a need for more counseling, more social workers. So sort of the two together about starting school earlier and what sort of supports can we get in place.
I hope we use this opportunity to have a rigorous and open and public, very rigorous and debate on balanced calendar year-round schools, whatever you want to call it. We've already made arrangements. This was my insistence. I had to fight a little bit to get this one in, that every school district is presumed to have a waiver approved if they want to start early. The state's not going to mandate that they start early. But every school district now, and for this fall in particular, is assumed to have been approved to start early if they want to. So those plans can start right now. With regards to, what was the second part of your question, Jennifer? Mental health services and other supplemental things. Yeah, I agree. I think that's something that's very vital. But I already went over the fact that we're going to have serious budget implications in this year and next year. And so it'll be difficult to find some. I think we're going to be able to find some reduced expenses in certain areas that we can transfer to some of those services. But I'm not aware of anybody specifically working on those right now, but I think it's a perfectly legitimate question.
So do you think the federal government stimulus that has come through, will that help with our state funding shortfall?
The state funding the federal guidelines for funds coming from the federal government so far have been very clearly and articulately restricted for specific purposes. And basically they all identify that they have to be used specific for COVID-related expenses. There are some ambiguities in that because everybody, heavens knows that the fact that we had to adjust on the fly and put all this disruption into schools was 100% related to the virus spread. And so there are people working through those two things right now, trying to reconcile how much flexibility we actually have. And I also expect there to be a second tranche of federal funds coming out soon. And we'll keep a close eye on that to see if there is some more flexibility there for states to direct the funds to where it's the most needed.
And there's a question sort of just in terminology. Can you speak more about a negative supplemental and what does that mean?
Yeah.
And does it mean, as a follow-up, a proration to the funds that districts will be receiving between now and their payment in July?
So to the second part of your question, my response is I certainly hope not. That is the reason why I started this conversation by saying we need to start now with the entirety of our budgets to make adjustments, because the longer we wait, the less latitude and flexibility we have to make adjustments. A negative supplemental means that Michigan has to balance its budget. We had projected so much revenue and we projected so much spending that would carry us through the end of September of this year, as in every budget year. We now know that that revenue is going to be short by between $1 and $3 billion. So we therefore have to adjust the spending by that same amount, whatever it ends up being. And that is called a negative supplemental, meaning it's taking money and revenue out, or excuse me, taking spending out of the projected budget. That's a negative action.
And then there was a question of one specific group of funds, the early literacy coach grants. Are those something that you would want to see continued, or something that, and I know these are all up in the air, we don't know the numbers, but as far as some of the priorities that you look at?
I don't think there'd be any doubt and any question and any pushback if we had identified and prioritized all the spending associated with schools, particularly schools and programs, keeping it separate from per pupil funding. That early reading literacy would rank high on everybody's scale. So we are going to have to do a prioritization, and the ones at the top of that list, the more important ones, will have the least amount, if any, impact, and those at the bottom will have the most. And your jobs will be to help communicate how you think those priorities should be, particularly on special programs, and convey that to your representatives and your senators, particularly those associated with those specific budgets. And so we have the broad-based input and grassroots input to help in that prioritization process. Don't count just on us to do it. We need your input.
And I think just still along that budget guidance, as you know, school budgets run different than, the fiscal year runs different than the state fiscal year.
Yes, ma'am.
They're putting their budgets together now and have to approve in June. Do you have any recommendations or guidance for them as far as what they should base that on? Should they be looking at a flat budget? Should they be lowering their expectations for a foundation allowance?
My best answer to that is I think foundation allowance adjustments will be the very last thing we'll want to do. I can't tell you if it'll get there or not yet, because we don't know enough information. I can just tell you it'll be the highest priority.
Sort of figured that's a lot of the answers right now is.
I'm really sorry that I can't be more definitive, but there literally we don't know. I mean, when you got a range of potential adjustments of over $2 billion, that's a pretty big range.
So on a different subject, as we talk about this continuation of learning plan and our seniors specifically, one of the concerns raised was that universities might view Michigan seniors differently if they are getting credit, no credit versus grades. And is there any conversation with the universities or with higher education as far as the grades that will be coming to our seniors? I know it's up to locals to determine how those grades are assigned, but this was more of a bigger picture. As they start to go for acceptance into colleges, there's concern that some of this could hurt them.
So that is a fantastic question. I've probably had 30 of these Zoom meetings in the last 2 weeks, and not all related to education, but many of them have been. And this is the first time that very specific question has come up. I got to ask a question here. Who on my staff is staffing this call?
Senator Darren's on, and Ann is as well.
Okay, great. We got the two best we can get staffing this call, and so they are recording this specific question right now. I can't give you an answer to it, but I think it's very important that we find an answer for it, and we'll engage the higher ed folks and provide feedback, Jennifer, I guess right through you on this, so that you can disseminate it to your members and so forth. But I would be just speculating on what the reaction is going to be, but it's a really important question. We'll get right on it. By the way, this also helps me emphasize for just a moment, and this is for not just emergency and crises situations, but it's for normal times also. Never assume that your elected officials at any level see what you see, hear what you hear, or know what you know. If you got a question and you think it's important, you need to make sure somebody else hears it. That is how we work. That's what self-government is about. And you know, we do our best, those of us that are privileged enough to be elected, but there's no way we can see everything you see, hear everything you hear, or even know what you know. And so this is, in this Zoom meeting and that specific question are Exhibit A for why that's so important.
And then changing topics again to school construction. We've got a lot of projects out there that some are halted, some are halted mid-project, some are waiting to begin. And as we talk about possibly starting the school year early in 2021 or even a balanced calendar, will school construction options be opened up soon? So those facilities will be ready sooner. One of the things we've been talking about, just to add on to this question, is if we were able to work on school construction now while the students are not in the building, we could have those projects done sooner to then allow us to have conversations with our unions about starting school earlier.
Right.
So it all plays together, but are there any of those conversations going on about school construction?
One of the biggest lessons learned and one of my biggest disappointments in this process has been how we've restricted those kinds of activities. It was unnecessary. Other states have allowed those to continue in a safe way. We've got a executive office that has chosen to take a different path. I believe that will be relieved by if not before April 30th, and it is a high priority and is being talked about, almost daily.
And sort of along the safety route as well, we have a question about safety in schools when we come back. Is there any plan to prepare for the idea that we may need mandatory masks for teachers or students, or things along that line that we've seen happen or being talked about in New York especially? Is there any conversation about that? Have we looked into the fall really as we talk about these things?
We have, and that's probably not the highest priority right this second, but it's on the list to review. I am praying that we are in a condition different in the fall than we are now, so we don't have to go to that extension of wearing masks. It's possible, however. But absolutely, we will be continuing to influence and encourage, hygiene. And it's kind of hard to do social distancing in schools when you're in school, but nonetheless, I think all of our lives have changed a bit here, and figuring out a way to feather in those kind of requirements the best way we can, and still carry out our lives in a safe way is, it's up to us to figure out that challenge. If supplies like masks become a mandate, don't anybody leave this meeting thinking that's even being contemplated right now, but I'm just saying if it does, then we absolutely have to give consideration to how to make sure that those funds are provided.
Are ISDs being looked at to add reimbursements under some of the funding streams? I see there are no provisions laid out initially. And I think this question comes from the idea that they are the ones that are having to approve all of the continuation of learning plans. Is there any additional look at funding for those?
For ISDs?
Yes.
I'm not aware of any consideration for that right now, no.
Okay.
Doesn't mean it's not legitimate, doesn't mean it shouldn't be considered, but I'm not aware of any effort on that right now.
Okay. And we've got a series of questions from different people about assessments. I'm going to try to summarize them all into one.
Okay.
As you know, we have the waiver for this year, so we're not having to do those. Juniors are expected to take the SAT in the fall as a senior. But as we look into next year, there are high costs to doing some of this testing. And if we're looking at lower budgets, that could be an issue. And on the other side, you're talking about student learning and student growth with a class that will then be tested in the spring on what has not been a year's worth of learning, because there's going to be a catch up with the summer slide. So the questions range from what do you think we're going to do to just sort of keeping those conversations going. And is MSTEP going to be a reliable test in the fall or in the spring? And what do we do about those assessments and how they affect so much of what we do?
So I think you might be aware that about 3 weeks ago or so, we created 4 different work groups that include the entirety of the spectrum of education, K-12 education. And the first recommendations that came out were, of course, those related to the distance learning and guidelines there. One of the next work groups is testing and assessments. And you got a couple people on our call here, Darren and Ann, that are staffing this call that are intimately involved in those efforts. I am going to personally advocate for this, that for the rest of this school year and the entirety of the next school year, we focus on doing the tests necessary to affirm and know where kids stand, and not use those tests for assessing school performance or even teacher performance. I'm not sure I'm going to win in that argument, but I'm going to advocate it strongly, because though I think accountability and performance of schools and teachers is very, very important, I don't want to get lost in the noise of the highest level of importance, and that is the student learning and student status. And so your question about MSTEP, I think, is something that needs to be wrestled with the entirety of the education community, including the school board, the state school board, and the Department of Education. But we can't let zealots concerned about Uber testing to get in the way and create unnecessary friction for just focusing on. It's a really important time period. We've never had experienced this before. Hopefully we'll never will again. But we really have to keep in mind all the other things that would be nice to measure and important to measure. But if they get in the way of us focusing on kids and they're knowing where they're at and what their needs are, right down to the individual level, then I think we'll be making a mistake. And toward the end of this next calendar year, next school year, we can then start reintroducing those concepts of assessing not just students, but also the performance of schools and teachers and so forth. So I'm speaking primarily here as one person, one voice, because it's going to involve the entirety of the work groups. But I'm just telling you right now, that is something that I am going to personally try to advocate for. And if your membership, Jennifer, feels differently about that, I'd like to hear about it.
I think my membership might agree with a lot of the points you made, but we'll certainly be talking to them through it, and I will stay in touch with you as closely as I can as we go forward. I am a part of a couple of those work groups, so those have been good conversations, and we hope that they'll be able to continue, and have always appreciated your openness to talk with us about what our members' concerns are. And with that, I think I've gotten through all the questions, unless there's anything left out there that someone wanted to throw out real quick.
Looks like Kevin Polston has a final question. Can you read it for me?
Yep. Aligning our testing system to what matters in school and allowing teachers to have timely data to drive instruction is critical.
I hope that's what I just said. I hope that's what I just said.
Well, we really appreciate your time, Senator. And I just want to reiterate to the people on the call, this was put together so very quickly, and I just can't thank you enough for doing that. We appreciate hearing from you. And if we have follow-up questions, I will be sure to be in touch with you and Ann and Darren.
We don't need to wait forever to do this again if it's helpful. We're over the course of the next 2 weeks or so, we're going to have more clarity as to recommendations for coming out of the stay home, stay safe order. And so then we'll be able to know better about what that means, beyond that. You guys are living, breathing examples of what it really means to be a self-government, right at the grassroots level. You have a really important job to do. And my final comments for you are just 4 words: live, love, and work smartly. Have a great day.
Thank you, Senator. There were, for those people that are left, there were a couple other questions that were aimed a little more at MASB that I'll cover just real quick. One was about suggestions and guidelines for graduation ceremonies. Until we get the stay home, stay safe order lifted, we don't really have anything to tell you about that. We have heard anecdotally from districts, both in Michigan and out of Michigan, that they're planning things for July or for August. I heard one district may do something for their seniors at homecoming next year. So I would urge you to think creatively, but until we get out of the stay home, stay safe order, there's not much else we can tell you about that. And then there's one other question, and now I'm blanking on it. But we will certainly keep you apprised as we hear more and more about the budget. I don't know, we expect the consensus revenue estimating conference in the middle of May. And as Senator Shirkey said, we have no idea what those numbers are going to look like, except that they're not going to look good. So we'll keep an eye on that. It's one of the closest things we're watching, along with the school construction issue. As you heard Senator Shirkey, he tends to agree with us that we need to be able to do school construction. There are many more reasons than what was listed in this call, but we are hopeful that we can have those conversations. We also know that the building trades are having those conversations with the governor's office to show her and lay out to her safe construction place practices. So hopefully they can put her mind at ease that we can do these things, and then she'll open that up for us. So we're hopeful, and those conversations are happening. A couple of the last things on here: tips for writing a bill proposal. I would just put your ideas down in writing, what you want it to do and how you would suggest doing it, and then we can let the lawyers work that out at the Legislative Service Bureau, but that's the best way to do it. Why do you want it, and what do you want it to do are the 2 things you always need when you're doing something like that. The first day of school is prohibited subject to bargaining. The calendar is not. And so that's one thing that he didn't say as we talk about, do you want an early school year? You need to have buy-in from your union. You're going to have to renegotiate that with them or have a memo of understanding. So as you're looking forward to that, that is something that you're going to have those conversations with your unions. The other question we get asked a lot is if we start early August and we still go until June and have, say, a 190-day school year, what does that mean for budgets? And that's a conversation we're having with the legislature to say, you're urging us to start early if we can. Districts would like to start early if they can to get those kids back in a classroom, but we're going to have to talk about financial incentives or other incentives in order to pay for extra days in a school year. So that conversation is going on sort of at the same time. And I just want to thank you all for joining us today. I apologize to the few of you who had technical difficulties. Hopefully we got it going for you. This will be recorded and sent out hopefully tomorrow we'll have it ready, but it will be recorded and put up on our website for anyone who missed it or missed parts of it. And I will have another conversation with Senator Shirkey. It sounds like he's willing to do this again, and maybe we can bring him back after the stay home, stay safe. This order expires on April 30th. If you have any other ideas for things that you want to hear about that you're not hearing or people you'd like to hear from, send me an email, let me know, and we'll do our best to keep you as informed as possible. Thank you. Wash your hands, stay safe, and be graceful with each other.